Exceptional Randos shows produced live in Sunroom Studios. Oh man, it's not even Base Capsules. It's like Base Command now. It's a much bigger room. I mean, proportionally. Wow, that was random. Exceptional radio. You know, it's actually remarkably comfortable for freaking January, almost February. You know, we're supposed to be in peak winter here. And we had like a week of, you know, really, really bitter cold, but 41 degrees is the high. It's 41 degrees right now. It's only supposed to get down to 31 degrees tonight, and I bet it won't actually freeze. I bet the ground's going to be warm enough. It's going to be like, no, take that, weather. It's just going to be wet and still muddy. But it's not like bone-chilling, bitter, cold, like painful, make you regret your decisions. It's...
No, and it's usually on the way to that right now. So I always generally hope for a mild winter, but this particular one, I thought we were going to get one just because it was so dry over the summer. And that's where I'm like, I think there's a lot of groundwater that's keeping the ground warm, that's fighting the cold, which is where there's been just crazy fogs this year.
Oh, yeah.
All over the country.
I mean, I live on top of a hill. I went outside the other day, and everything from my waist up was dry, but everything from my, like, you know, mid-thigh down had this, you know, coating of condensation, like morning dew. It wasn't just on the ground, though. It was like, you know, on everything. But only up to, like, you know, halfway between my knees and my waist. Real strange. Like, if that had frozen, there would have been a little crust of ice around everything. This is the weirdest winter. If this is what, like, extreme weather winters in Indiana are supposed to or end up looking like, I'm cool with this. It just means we have like an extended mud season instead of an actual freezing season.
Well, and I don't know if you count the salt because salt is part of the season in a way where,
oh yeah,
it definitely affects vehicles, but it also affects like your clothing. I know my jeans will get that like salt
that
residue
look
at the bottom. Yeah, it's like you can't wear them as many times in the winter as you can during other seasons without washing them, because it's like, I feel like jeans, you can't wash them too frequently or it like ruins the fabric. So you almost have to wear them a couple of times before you wash them. But it's like, it's always
wear denim at least 1 week before I consider washing it, and then I give it like the shake and smell test. And if it's not horrible, I will keep them going, because denim, you're right, it wears out. Like, you wash them enough, they turn into really supple, soft, comfortable, and fall apart.
But that's also where you got to rotate, because like you can wear the same pair every day, but it's definitely gonna like.
Oh no! I mean, I've got like 4 pair of jeans that I rotate.
Yeah, where it's like
I might actually go a month without washing all of them, because I don't wear them all the time.
That's about the same, yeah. Because it's like, it is ridiculous to rotate like other pants in, and then by the time you get back to the jeans, it's like they don't smell at all.
Yeah, they've completely aired out.
Especially if you hang them, like if they sit on the floor in a pile, sometimes it can get rank. But,
oh man, like anytime anything spends anywhere beyond, like, I want to say 45 minutes within a 1 foot radius of a pile of socks, like, they might as well be in the pile of socks at that point. That sock foot smell, that if that's not contained, it can that colonizes a room really quickly. It's bad.
Yeah. Well, and it's hard to know if it's like on something or not. And once it gets on something, it's hard to get it off.
Yeah.
Like especially slippers are weird in that it's almost like they get smelly way quicker than shoes.
Yeah.
Like I have some shoes that I've had for years that just don't smell yet, and it's like obviously compared to workout shoes, the workout shoes are gonna get there quicker, but
Yeah.
even those, if you take care of them, it's like only when I was like wearing, if I wear tennis shoes on a flight, that's when they smell really bad. It's like you wear socks longer than you should. I mean, if you don't take an extra pair to switch. But there's like certain situations where shoes will smell really quickly versus slippers. It's like, I don't know if it's the sweating or what, but it just seems to be a much quicker like bacteria buildup.
So I've got a pair of like snow boots, rubber around the foot, well, and leather up to the mid calf, and then they've got a liner, and those things don't smell like anything. Granted, like 11 months out of the year, they sit with a desiccant pack at the bottom of the toe box. But I've got another pair of boots that I wear maybe 3 months out of the year that also have, like, a desiccant pack, but those things also don't smell. And so the common thing there is I use special socks with them. I've got, like, polypropylene liner sock and then a wool insulating or thermal layer, I guess. And they don't smell like anything, like, ever. And like my waders, my fishing waders, those things don't smell like anything either. But I also wear the polypropylene socks, and then I also wash those things out. I have a dryer system for them. So those are all special cases or special use footwear where I have some kind of post-use care protocol where I make sure that they're ready for the next time, I guess. But you're right. Like my sliders, my bumper footwear that I wander around the house in, I gotta wash those things at least once a month. Well, especially in the warmer months. Like right now, they don't smell like anything because it's dry and cold in the house. But in the summer, they get really rank, like a special kind of rank that no individual, like, active footwear ever gets. And the funny thing is, they're supposed to be made out of some kind of like antimicrobial material, but I don't think that stuff works for, like, beyond the first month. All of my tennis shoes, I've moved to the mesh type tennis shoes because they air out the best.
And it seems to promote the least sweating.
Yeah. My mud boots, those things, I probably need to, like, wash them out for real and then put like a whole like giant sized desiccant pack in each one, because every time I put my feet in them, they feel like extra cold. There's something else about them. There's something going on. I'm glad you brought this up because now it's on my mind and I'm thinking about it.
I wonder if there's slippers with cooling gel to prevent sweating as much, because I know I have a pillow with cooling gel, and it seems like it would be a good thing for feet.
Yeah. Maybe it's just the neoprene in the rubber boot that is just retaining the cold temperature because they're near the door. Like they actually do their job. Like if I set them next to the heater vent or something like that, maybe they'd be really hot. I don't know if I want that.
Yeah, it's like you think you'd want something to warm your feet, but it could probably get smelly really quick.
Oh yeah, no, that would backfire right quick. You know, the whole idea of like battery heat assisted clothing or battery assisted heated clothing type of stuff, not chemical heat, because that whole metal oxidizing releasing heat thing is kind of cool, but also that's kind of scary that there's a metal based compound in a pouch that's reacting aggressively to oxygen in the air and heating up. That's like, I think that's how chemical burns happen. In fact, I'm almost positive that's like how chemical burns happen. But anyways, but I like the idea of like a heated vest that one can wear underneath their jacket layers, or heated like a heated intermediate layer of clothing if one were to go out into extremely cold weather for more than a few minutes at a time. I can see the practicality of it's like having a shield. It's like in Star Trek. Then they have personal shields when they go onto a planet because it has a caustic atmosphere or some crap. And so I get it. That's kind of cool. But I don't like the idea of heated socks, of like electric socks. Because no matter how many times I've gone out into the wilderness in the snow with the right kind of footwear, at some point I'm moving around and my feet sweat because my feet are in like a very well insulated space. They're nice and toasty. They're not wet because my boots failed. They're wet because I'm perspiring. And there's something about having a bunch of electricity around my feet that just seems like a terrible idea. Like a really bad idea.
Yeah, on that note, I've been like, I know it gets worse during the winter, but I've been so electrically charged. It's like painful sometimes when I touch a doorknob.
Oh,
and
yeah.
One time I like touched my computer and the fucking
did it restart?
Static. It almost did, but the screen blinked.
Oh shit.
Yeah, it's happened twice now where I'm like,
that's not cool.
It's not.
That's really not cool.
No, dude, that's what I'm saying. Like, I've never had that happen before where I've like touched my computer and a static discharge has made a screen blink. That shit has never happened. I mean, until now, until this winter, where I'm like, I don't know what is going on with the charge this year, but it's just like I have to like ground myself before I touch a doorknob every fucking time, or else it's like I don't know how much charge it's getting, but it's gotten to the point where it like hurts.
Oh man.
Because I'm like, I don't know if I'm trying not to like drag my feet, because I feel like, obviously you can intentionally drag your feet to make it happen. But it's gotten to the point where I'm like, do I need to wear rubber gloves around the house or some shit? What the fuck?
I mean, that would just
really bad.
That would just make
really
it worse.
bad.
That would just contain it until you took the gloves off and then touched something else. And then by the time that happened, it would probably be enough to actually.
mean, or maybe I need to wear rubber socks. I don't know.
I mean,
Something.
it's like wearing it. You'd have to wear some kind of room-based discharge strap that you attach to the ceiling, I guess. A centrally located discharge point in the ceiling so that you can. But then every time you leave the room, you got to reconnect it to the next room. That sounds like being a prisoner of technology. There's got to be a better way to have some kind of like passive discharge system. Like maybe it's built into your chair. The act of sitting down. Or the desk. The desk has a discharge strap. No matter what happens, you're going to get shocked.
Yeah.
It's got to be.
It's like I need to have something attached that's constantly discharging.
I don't think it's practical to like erect a Faraday cage inside of a room, because then you have to generate a specific wireless environment for that room if you want to have your wireless devices communicate with the outside world, or they have to be hardwired. I wonder if there might be something in the air. Like there's some building nearby that's creating an electromagnetic field, and I'm just going to go out on a limb, but your like magnificent hair is just like a beacon for that kind of electromagnetic activity.
It turns out a bigger person creates a bigger charge to produce the same voltage, so it's like we're discharging the same voltage, but the intensity is higher if a person's bigger. So it's like, and the humidity apparently plays a huge role in it. We've been trying to, use humidifier and shit, but it's like it's so dry that
maybe that's what's doing it. Your humidifier is creating an electromagnetic field.
No, the humidity fights it. So that's where we like got a humidifier, and it's like
it's just not trying enough.
To keep it's just not enough.
Man, have you like man, I would almost want to do it like a smoke test around all the windows and anywhere, and see if there's any gaps where air's coming in, letting cold air in. Unless it's like something real weird, like the building is made out of a material that just absorbs moisture.
I mean, it's like both of those things, but that's also where, again, it's like the winter dryness just makes it significantly worse.
Oh man, I'd be going around with like a roll of packing tape and sealing up any gaps I could find with the smoke test. I went a little overboard like the second or third year after I got the house. In the sunroom, it had storm windows. It wasn't habitable. It got freezing cold in the winter, and but I wanted to use it. And so I went around the edges of the floor with a can of spray foam. I used like 2 cans because some of the gaps were so big, just letting air in. And it worked. It completely sealed off the floor. Like all of a sudden the drafts were gone. It was still cold because single pane windows don't have any insulative quality at all. But that changed when I put plastic. I put giant sheets of plastic up around all the windows, and they would breathe. You could watch them like flex when the air pressure changed. It's actually really cool. Until the cats started cutting it. And then they got all these big patches of tape to hold it together. And that was also cool because it saved it. It didn't have to replace a giant sheet of plastic, but they were no longer like pristine. That was a lot of effort. It looked so terrible in retrospect. And it took me years to go around the edge because I, put stuff in the room, but it took me years to clear away enough around the edge that I could go around and like trim off the overflow foam. It's incredible how many projects can happen all at once, and then just because of priority, some things get pushed behind other things until they like take years to resolve. I think if I were to try to do that now, I'd just get it done in like a day or two.
Well, how old were you in the first time?
Oh, I mean, this was like 10 years ago, but I was like, first time homeowner, didn't really, I only had like a vague idea of what to do. And of course, I only watched the first half of the YouTube video. Like, oh yeah, this is intuitive. I'll figure out the rest of it. Oh crap, I need to use this space. Well, I'll just partially deploy the room. Next thing I know, the room is completely deployed and big globs of hard foam all over the floor. Well, in the corners, of course, not in the middle of the floor, and not in a way that they actually impeded utilization of the room. They just looked ugly, like really ugly. But some of those gaps are huge, like over an inch. And I don't think there would be any way to make them look good without, short of completely replacing all of the paneling around the edge of the room. And I wasn't prepared to take on that kind of a project or that depth of the project. I just wanted to have
It's a lot.
I just wanted to have a functional desk and an office environment. I didn't actually have a clue about what was behind all the wood paneling. I just attached stuff to it. I think the current iteration is much more stable. I know it's a lot more stable. It's completely habitable. We leave the door into the sunroom open, and I don't think that it's the primary heat sink in the house. I think that's actually in the utility room in the back of the house. Things that like I never thought about when I just lived with my parents or had lived in an apartment. The joys of home ownership, as my father would say.
Yeah. Well, and
like scrutinizing over a broom. It's like, time to get a broom. What kind of broom? What size broom do I actually need? What kind of surface am I actually using this broom on?
no, and it's one of those, as you're saying, like you got to develop your tools over time specifically for it, and then something happens and you may have the tools and you may not, and it's like I feel like you got to go. You've probably gone through all the cycles to where you have everything now, but it's like as things break down, just naturally the cycles are gonna like start repeating. But it's like an oven or something. An oven may go out, and sometimes it's like the heating element, but sometimes it's like a part that isn't made anymore, and then you have to replace the entire oven, and it's like shit like that where some of the stuff you can do, like it's not actually that difficult to replace a heating element.
Oh, I was thinking we're on the other end of the scale where it's like something that breaks very infrequently, and then you buy the replacement thing for it. But it's like you get two of them instead of just buying one. You end up with like a replacement and a spare. And so the spare goes into a drawer, and then years go by, and that thing breaks again, and then you forget that you had the backup to the replacement, and you order another one, and it's a 2-pack, and so you replace the thing, and then you go to put it into the drawer that the other one is already in, not remembering that it's there, but selecting that drawer because it's the logical place to put that kind of thing, and lo and behold, now you've got a backup and another backup. This is how people end up with like multiples of something that doesn't break very often, but when it does, you need it, but you forget that you have it because it happens so infrequently. Like, I have a bunch of screwdrivers. I know I don't need screwdrivers. but certain types of like light bulbs now, man. Like the light element for my oven. Actually, I need to replace that now that you reminded me about the oven too.
Those oven light bulbs are crucial. It's like, man,
I've managed to get by without it.
It's like,
I've managed to get by without the oven light for the last year, I think. I just haven't made it a priority to replace it. And I've had incredible results going by not by the what it looks like test, but by the what it smells like test. Like, obviously I still do temperature readings, but I guess that means I really trust my oven's temperature sensor. What that really means. I know that it happens with small things because I remember one point last summer, I think I lost the spring to the line trimmer that I have, and Ryobi sells them in packs of 3, and I got them and I replaced the spring and I put them up in this little cup thing in the sunroom, and lo and behold, there were 2 more in it already. So I have 4. I think that's like one of the goals of capitalism. You already have 2, but you need 3 more because you can't find them because you lose them only once a year. And you only lose 1 a year. I actually attached the spring mechanism with, like, strapped it down with 2 pieces of metal and some screws, and now it's not going anywhere. Bastards. You'd think that a piece of like a landscaping tool, a power tool of sorts, would be designed in such a way that it wouldn't just fly apart under normal use. Like, these companies, they spend enough money on engineering to change parts out and replace them with pieces of plastic. Why can't they figure out a way to make a mechanism that doesn't lose grip of itself? I mean, obviously, like, if an airplane like can be designed in such a way that it falls apart or loses a door hatch if it's missing 4 bolts, which makes sense. Like, it has to be held together somehow. Like, why are things made in such a way that they can just come apart?
And it's wild, like, how much design has been separated out, so there's no collaboration in ways where things can come together that way and roll off the assembly line. But as you're saying, then it just falls apart under use in ways where it shouldn't.
I mean, NASA can get away with having 20 different organizations working on different parts of a machine, not knowing what they're working on, and bring it together and make it happen. Yeah, like 40 years ago.
I mean,
And well, no, now they
But
still
even
build
then,
robots that last for like a decade longer than the mission parameters call for on Mars.
well, but that's where they make it seem like they can do that, but then they end up with somebody with not enough fuel, and then they have to like get them back on the fly, and then they make a movie about it 20 years later to make it seem like they didn't almost kill these people. Or
Well, yeah. So there are
was like,
groups within NASA that can organize a large team of engineers to come together and build a robot, a single, basically prototype robot to last a decade longer than mission parameters call for. But it's crazy to me that like. It just blows my mind that at some point 4 bolts were removed from a door that have to be replaced. They're like torque to spec bolts, so if they're torqued beyond that, they have to be replaced. If they're removed, they have to be replaced. They basically just have to be replaced anytime that door is opened up, which means at some point those 4 bolts weren't there. Apparently, is what I'm reading from what I read from the initial reporting.
bidding was a mistake.
They
never should have designed anything through bidding. That was a logistic mistake. The government never should have started doing it. Private never should have started doing it, especially aeronautics. And that's where like the Columbia shit happens. And that's,
the thing that really gets me, you shared an article where the current CEO of Boeing is talking about how the whole intent was to run the place like a business, not a great engineering firm. And that just makes me like furious, because these are fucking airplanes with hundreds of people on them, and lives are like, on the line every time one of those things takes off. And Boeing should absolutely be run like a great engineering firm. That should be the business model, to be a great engineering firm, not to be a good business. Like, when is good business include jeopardizing the passenger's life in any way? And I'm sure that there's some calculus that says, oh, we're beyond a measure where our insurance companies will cover it, blah, 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 and stuff. But
that's exactly what the problem is that they do a calculation, and if the life is less costly than rolling through and like taking the risk, then they'll opt to like put the life at risk instead of making the fix. And they've been doing this shit on cars, which is where, what was it, the Gremlin? The Pinto.
The Pinto is the one that gets rear-ended and explodes.
Yeah,
I think that's the Pinto.
I think the Gremlin has some problems too. I think both of them did. But it was like different problems. Like the Gremlin may have just like the drive shaft may have just fallen.
Maybe it was the Gremlin that explodes. Now I want to know.
I think both of them had major problems. It was I think the train.
No, is the exploding Ford Pinto.
Yeah, the Pinto was the one that exploded.
The Gremlin wasn't a very good car either, but it didn't explode like the Pinto.
No. But maybe they didn't have seat belts. There was something about the Gremlin that was also like really bad. But it was like, it definitely wasn't the exploding thing. I just remember because they used it in the business ethics example.
The best exposure I can think of to the Gremlin would be Wayne's World. They rode around in a Gremlin. I think the Gremlins, on a conceptual level, it's not that bad. It has a larger passenger door than the driver's door to facilitate getting in and out of the back seat. That's not a terrible idea. They just look weird. Also, AMC was kind of going out of business at the time. I'm pretty sure they were being bought up by Chrysler in the 70s.
there's like so many motor companies that are out of business that like have either been absorbed or just gone altogether, which is wild.
I was reading a complaint about modern Jeep is that they've brought to market several Fiat designed vehicles that have no business being called Jeeps. Like they make this really tiny Jeep that's really a Fiat, and it has this problem where, and it's like a design issue. If the vehicle corners too hard, if it experiences too many G's, it will experience like oil starvation in the opposite side cylinder, on the inside of the corner. The engines eat themselves apparently, which means that they definitely are not off-road vehicles. Because if they were off camber and a corner of the engine was all of a sudden starved, they would eat themselves.
Yeah, Jeep is always such a weird. It's not even just Jeep so much as like off-road vehicles are a weird one in that very few people are driving like rally in real life. And then very few people are doing actual off-roading. So they're making this entire class of vehicle
Rally inspired.
Yes, inspired by this activity that doesn't get used for and
rock crawler inspired. Man.
And that's where I'm like,
I'm not gonna lie, some of those rock crawlers look really fucking cool, and I'm sure they can climb over whatever they want to, but all they ever see is a pile of snow in a mall parking lot.
Mm-hmm. If that, because that's where I'm like, a lot of these people who cosplay the idea of doing these things just never even put the vehicles even remotely close to the scenario in which they're meant to be originally used. And that's where it's like I saw an advertisement for, it was like a Humvee that had been modified, and it had like a
why does a Humvee need to be modified? They should be capable of going anywhere they want right out the gate. Well, they are. I mean, they are capable.
It was like it was meant to be like a racing.
Oh Lord!
A racing Humvee, but also like a high speed. So it had like a spoiler on it, like an extended fucking.
That just seems so confused.
F1 spoiler, and it was like a dually, but it was also. I think it had like 2 engines, something ridiculous where you're like, who needs this fucking vehicle? But that's why the person who made it was selling it, because they clearly couldn't find an actual use for it. I feel like it's like one of those vehicles you end up running on the salt flats to try to get it up to speed, and that's really the only place, it would make any sense to actually use it. So
my almost 30-year-old truck has factory lift, and it's got skid plates and 4-wheel drive, and I've got meaty tires, and I try to use it for its capabilities, like when I need to. But you know what? I don't even need. I have only put it in 4-wheel drive like a handful of times this entire year. Actually, this year is just 28 days, so it's really not that great of this. Not that big of a deal. Okay, in the last 365 days, I've only put it in 4-wheel drive, like low for a handful of times. Like, I only really remember the most recent time is because there was snow on the ground, and we went on a drive on a service road, like a county service road in the woods where had seen no traffic prior to us. We had first right over the snow. It was great. But I don't get to use that kind of capability very often because I don't actually need to, because the vast majority of places that I go, the worst it gets is some gravel. And occasionally when I find a place where it's like, oh yeah, I actually do need these kinds of capabilities, I'm really glad that I have them, but do I really need to go into those places? No. And it's like it's a strange realization. It's like a lot of the things that I I'm not complaining about the tires that I have. My tires are like designed for snow. They're great in the cold. They actually suck when it's hot out. And my truck does great. It's 30 years old though. I don't think it needs more. In fact, if it had more, it would probably be more of a pain in the ass than it already is. In fact, I've considered going back to smaller tires because and actually taming the vehicle again so that it behaves more normally on paved roads. Because I think I'd rather have like a comfortable ride on the interstate than assurance that for the 1%, not even one, like 0.01% of the time that I operate the vehicle, I'll be able to get through something that I shouldn't be going through anyways.
There has to be a better way for. I don't think that necessarily all vehicles should have treads, but the way that tires get worn out, I know obviously treads get worn out in a different way, but they're not like a permanent solution either. But it's like, I guess in the way that friction just wears things down over time. Like it feels like there should inevitably be some engineering breakthrough to be a material that is the most resistant to that friction and also resistant to like running over a rock or some shit like that. Where I know they've definitely advanced the run flat technology and the wiring and the metal frames in the tires. So it's like there have been advances, but it's like in the amount of time that we've had cars, it feels like capitalism has like promised us more advances than it has delivered. And it's not necessarily because, as we know, not because the engineers haven't figured out something. So
I use the shit out of my fog light system. I use that like almost all the time. My headlights are so dim; they're basically just position lights. If I want to see anything at night, when there are other vehicles on the road just filling everything in front of me with their bright ass day glow glare lights, I have to use my fog light system. Like my high beams, all they do is illuminate signs. They don't illuminate the road in front of me. Like if I wanted high beam action, I absolutely need to turn on my off-road lamps. And I never do it because I don't want to blind people. Like I hate when I see like mall crawlers and mall haulers and big trucks with, their entire daylight system running. Like I don't want to be that guy. Shit, that person's an asshole. But I get it. They're sitting like 10 feet off the ground and their headlight system is bullshit at that angle. And so they have to illuminate the world like everything in front of them, like they're like a star burning bright in the night because they can't see otherwise. I mean, I get
Those
it.
people are so dangerous.
But yeah, exactly. They can't even see you when they pass by you because they're like so high up in the air. And I'm talking about when I'm in my truck, I see these gigantic vehicles. It's like, what business does this thing have being on a road next to anyone's house?
Or the highway for that matter.
Oh God, that's even scarier. Like, where they really can't see you.
I hate traveling on the highway with those trucks, or semi trucks aren't even that bad actually compared to those trucks. Yeah. I feel like semi trucks are more self-aware and drive safer than those particular trucks, which is like, it sounds crazy. Semi trucks with wind are really scary to drive with, but otherwise, like semi truck drivers are trying to get where they're going and get their fucking money. So it's like,
and they also have to they have to submit to testing like anytime anyone decides that they need to be tested for something. Their entire like commercial truck driving existence it goes under the microscope the moment any DOT official says, let's look at that guy or that driver.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, and they got black boxes too. So It's like, I'm not worried about them except when I'm right next to them, more so than it's like I feel like even they're cognizant of their lights and they cut their brights off as soon as you pass them more often than those other trucks.
Yeah.
Those other trucks, they'll just straight up leave their fucking brights on if you pass them. And I'm like, what's up with this culture, man? It's like a very specific road culture that they don't roll coal anymore. I don't know if rolling coal is just it destroyed their vehicles
Yeah.
too much or what, but
They got tired of replacing turbochargers.
yeah, because that's when I'm like, it's those same people, but they're just not rolling coal anymore.
Well,
And I
it costs a lot
sincerely
to
doubt it's
replace a
because they
turbo.
didn't- Yeah,
That shit's not cheap.
Mm.
Like the whole thing about rolling coal is so funny to me. It's like, yeah, let's put it in third gear and get the engine real hot and get the turbo spooling real hard, and then dump it into like first gear and then just flood it with fuel and let it just billow smoke. When the act of doing that doesn't cool down the turbocharger housing, all it does is heat up the journals, or the bearings in the little scroll, and the thing just gets hotter and hotter, and its internal cooling systems can't keep up with it, and then they seize up. That engine's toast. Who in their right mind thinks that doing something like that is cool? Like, I mean, I don't know. I don't get it. I'm not sure where the culture of, yeah, let's run this thing till it blows up in front of us. I mean, I can see if the vehicle has already been completely trashed, like the vehicle has got into a wreck and it's not even worth trying to salvage. I get it. Yeah, go ahead, burn out the engine, but not a fully functioning vehicle that actually has life in it. Not someone's toy truck that they've spent an inordinate amount of money, tens of thousands of dollars on. That just doesn't seem right. Who's subsidizing that shit?
I mean, the government in a way where I'm like, it doesn't seem like the government should subsidize companies that then make cars that are meant to break the law that don't have any real not to say that they should put governors or limiters on the cars to prevent it. The car never should have been that powerful if it was being meant for civilian roads. And that's where the need for oversized interiors is where you get the need for the oversized engines in a lot of cases, like for the Expedition. Like, you can't have a fucking 2-cylinder engine pulling an Expedition, especially when it's loaded up with fucking fat Americans.
Yeah.
So I get when they have these big vehicles needing these big engines, but not to say that it gets in a weird place where I'm like, I don't know if these roads, like if a road has a limit, why is the government allowing a company to make a car that's going to push the like a city road past its limit if it's on the road with any other vehicle? And that's where it starts to, this is back to that same, like, nobody communicating with each other. It's like, if there's a road limit, but Ford makes a car that goes over the road limit in 30% of the country because they're in small towns that don't have great infrastructure. It's good enough, but not good enough for the Expedition. Well, Ford's going to make that fucking car anyway because they're making it for the other part of the country that can take it. So that disconnect, it scales in all parts of the economy where you have people making things that aren't beneficial to other parts of the economy, but they don't give a fuck because they can profit off of it, which is like, it's fine until those things accumulate. And that's where I think the previous, like the boomers specifically, their decisions hadn't accumulated yet, so they didn't think that decisions accumulate because that's not what they saw. Whereas our generation started to see the accumulation of the previous generation's decisions. Like, we grew up with an ozone that already had a hole in it that we started recycling as kids to try to fight. Whereas the previous generation, they were already old by that time, effectively. So when I see the young kids growing up with nothing static in a way that, I think in a sense, like the accumulation of societal repercussions for decisions by society has started to accelerate in our lifetimes, but now kids see it. Like, if you make a post about an oppressed minority group, you're going to potentially see repercussions immediately. If it's like,
especially if you're in China.
Yeah. I mean,
that's like the most dystopian technocratic society.
But their repercussions like hit really fast in ways where I'm like, they have their social credit system, but like the collective bullying that takes place in the American context is like an entirely different set of repercussions, where depending on the person, it can hurt them or help them. So like, if Joe Rogan picks on an oppressed minority group and then they try to come back and like bully Joe Rogan, it's going to help him. Whereas if some individual that is isolated says something about an oppressed minority group and then gets bullied, I mean, potentially rightfully in retaliation, like sometimes it can be taken too far where that person then gets repercussions that like somebody like Joe Rogan wouldn't get. Like losing a job. Like Joe Rogan's never going to lose a job for talking about black people or trans people or some shit like that. So whereas like,
oh man, he just makes does he still make money for Spotify? Is it Spotify?
Oh yeah.
Well, he makes money for Spotify hand over fist.
Yeah, and Spotify's never going to stop giving him money for talking about oppressed minority groups. Whereas like anybody else who's not at that level, who's not famous, can potentially lose like they can be unemployed perpetually if they do some shit that's like politically incorrect, that's also actually really, really wrong. Because it's not even about being politically correct. It's about like, well, they may be politically incorrect, but is it like anti-Semitic? Is it like anti-black? Is it homophobic? Because if it is, it's wrong. So there's like, politically incorrect doesn't always mean that you're like punching down at an oppressed minority. Sometimes politically incorrect can be like, oh, I didn't know it was okay to talk about weed and acting like weed is like this shady thing. And then you like shame people for talking. Like that could be just as politically incorrect as certain things, but there's nobody who's really like impacted directly by it. So that's where I'm like, all political incorrectness doesn't have to offend somebody. It just is no longer correct. That's where I think the idea of like people being offended because something is politically incorrect is this false. It's like
It's white knighting.
it is, but it's like a false like paradigm of a logical leap where it's assumed that just because somebody's politically incorrect that somebody's going to be offended by it, when it's like, well, does your political incorrectness include making a marginalized group seem like they are lesser than? Because if that's the case, then yeah, of course somebody may be offended by it, but like again, I think that's where the assumption that all political correctness has to do with like
See,
a marginalized group is like that's what the right wingers want. They benefit from homogenization of definitions that also then they're the ones doing the defining.
oh man, it's like a really, really horrible bastard version of the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Yes, and that's how they end up trying to make it seem like social justice means that we're supposed to tolerate their perspectives, because then it's like they use those bastardized understandings to then make it seem like what's being said is completely different.
God, Spock
Where
would
it's
be
like,
so disappointed.
well, if you're tolerant, that means you're supposed to be tolerant of right wingers. No, that's not what that means.
God, Spock would be so disappointed right now. You know, it's tough because the world that we live in now is it's so technologically sophisticated. Somebody can fart in Sri Lanka and we'll know about it in 15 minutes. I mean, if it's trending. If whatever they tag it with is trending enough. I read that, God, I hate reading it, but I'm going to say the whole thing. On X, someone was reported that X, formerly known as Twitter, which I read that so often now, that actually bothers me because it just feeds my concern that they're just putting words in to get their word count up, because X, formerly known as Twitter, counts as 4 extra words every time they put it down. But that X, formerly known as Twitter, reacted to the deep fakes of Taylor Swift by blocking all searches for Taylor Swift and the associated tags. It was like right after the White House made their announcement about it. So, I mean, it looks like X, formerly known as Twitter, does know how to act in the public's interest and suppress dialogue that is not beneficial.
Yeah, and that's where you can see when they don't want to get sued, they act quickly. But then it's like if they know the people who are being victimized don't have clout or access to legal representation, they're like, oh no, we're just going to let them harass you.
Yeah. Well, it just shows that Elon is actually aware of the immense consumer power or influence that Taylor Swift has. Or at least his team is aware. They're like, hey guys, we should actually be concerned. She scared the Spotify team. All she had to do was look at them. I mean, obviously it was the right thing to do. And the worst part about it all is that, like, there's an entire industry of models and actresses who have absolutely no problem putting their entire body and bodily functions on display. And yet somebody is really keenly interested in Taylor Swift, who's not known for that, but is known for writing songs and performing and singing and that sort of thing. I mean, the Venn diagram of overlap is so minimal.
I'm not saying I'm glad it happened to her, but it was like happening to regular people.
It had to happen to somebody as high profile as Taylor Swift for anyone to actually be aware that this kind of thing is happening. Otherwise,
or no, to care.
Yeah, to care. Yeah,
like a girl just like unalived herself, a 14-year-old girl, like 2 weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago, and nobody gave a fuck because she doesn't make hit. She didn't make hit music. So the government didn't do shit then. And the only reason they're even fucking considering it is because Joe Biden wants to take a picture with fucking Taylor Swift. And it's like the way that the government ends up using their position to like get time with famous people. It's fucking insane. Because that's all this comes down to, is they're going to want to bring Taylor Swift to testify before Congress. And then everybody's going to take their fucking stupid picture. And everybody, can you sign this for my grandma? And we're not going to see that, but that's just going to happen because that's all they fucking care about. And
then Harvard's going to give her another honorary doctorate in like, oh God, something, media literacy. She'll have another doctorate from Harvard. It's okay.
Which is like,
good for her. I hope so that she gets as much. I hope that she's able to get as many changes made as possible that are necessary.
That guy is he's fucked.
Oh, he's toast. Like nobody. As soon as they find out who that person is,
they already know.
Oh, they are. Oh, they're definitely done.
They've broadcast his like profile on fucking CNN and shit.
Oh wow! So that person's
Twitter profile down.
That person's never going to be able to touch the internet ever again. They're.
I mean, no, dude. He's doubled down. He just locked his profile, and he thinks he's like gonna get away with it. Which again, it's like I've been following this guy, not like following his profile. I've been following the story, and he's like one of those idiots who's like an edgelord, and like he's just gonna keep being an edgelord for the clout, and thinks that this shit isn't gonna result in him really fucked somehow, whether it's like prison time or he's like sued in a way that all the money he makes for the rest of his life goes to Taylor Swift.
God, this is like,
people are betting on him to go to jail or not.
Man,
there's like
it's like gotta be the worst way to self-own.
I mean, there's an entire like market dedicated to if this dude is going to be arrested before February or not. You can bet on it. I'm not going to say where, but it's like it exists. So that's where I'm like, he's definitely getting sued at the least, but depending on, the government might want to make an example of him just because, and they might retroactively like figure out a way to send this dude to jail or prison for that matter, where I'm like, I know, well, because if it happened in California, they may be able to use like revenge porn laws, because they have revenge porn laws in certain states, just not, I don't think they're national. And the issue is, if this qualifies under certain like clauses as revenge porn, they can get him in damn near every state where they have those laws if they go after him that way, because it's ultimately going to be like, where did people access this
Yeah,
information.
the guy that leaked like the Jennifer Lawrence photos, that guy went to prison for like 9 months and pay a whole bunch of fines.
Yeah, they're sending people to prison over this shit.
And those were like I mean, she's obviously a A-list celebrity who's been in quite a few big money movies and and that stuff. But she's not quite on the same like level as Taylor Swift. Like she doesn't have legions of fans who will like move entire like consumer mountains for her, like just because she looks at something and says, "I like that." Taylor Swift has immense control over her fan base, not control, influence.
Oh my God. There's 48 states have revenge porn laws, and the 2 that don't, you can still be prosecuted for it. So he may be seeing revenge porn
nationally
prosecution in 48 different jurisdictions, depending. I don't think they're gonna be nice. I think they're gonna be as
I mean, in the history of Taylor Swift,
bulldogish as possible in this suit. And if they can get criminal charges in 48 states, I guarantee Taylor Swift is going to file all 48 states.
Dude, Taylor Swift writes whole ass albums about guys that she decided did her wrong.
Yeah.
Like she's like a vengeful chick. Not to be messed with, like on any level, not to be to be underestimated to like the degree that she's willing to. She immortalizes people as being horrible. It's crazy. I expect a whole album about this, about how these people are trash.
So yeah, that dude is he's fucked. Like, I can't imagine the roller coaster of emotions he's gone through. His name is Zubair Abdi. The people have doxed him. Like, yeah, the Swifties have gone after him, but the roller coaster of emotions this guy has to have been going through in real life is like probably the most manic thing ever, in terms of not realizing that it's too late to undo. I bet every day he wakes up, he like goes through this brief period where he forgets what's happened, and then he realizes like, oh fuck, I made those AI pictures, and then he like, it starts all over. And then he realizes even the White House is talking about it at this point, where it's, if the White House responded that quickly, they are definitely going to call some sort of congressional fucking hearing about AI porn.
Oh man. There's nothing wrong with AI porn if they're completely AI generated characters. Just want to make sure that we're not anti-porn.
How can you be sure that the AI generated character doesn't resemble a real person on accident because it's been trained on real people's faces?
Oh, that's fucking horribly true.
Because
they have giant anime eyes. They have to look like anime chicks the whole time. And Marvel superheroes from the 90s. Those are the only variations that are acceptable now. Anime and Marvel 90s superheroes. Those are what AI porn should be trained on, because that's like peak misogyny, I guess, expressed in animated form.
Yeah, and I don't think, like, if there was some massive campaign to make a bunch of fake AI porn of dudes and like disseminate it among their friends and family, I don't think that would actually even work.
No.
Like, I don't think dudes would like understand finally what victimization at scale of that means, because I I mean, it's not just me, but I know for a fact like men don't get the same repercussions for being hypersexual, but then you can't end up making something that's like illegal to make somebody understand something without them becoming like some sort of sexual terrorist, which is where that's what ZV Bear is at this point. That dude's like a sexual terrorist, um, whose target was Taylor Swift, but anybody can be targeted by sexual terrorism at this point through the use of AI. People could have done it before without AI if they were, and they have done it before. Um, even before Photoshop or video editing was like digitized, people would like
Oh yeah,
fake stuff.
Making compost images with film isn't hard if you have the tools.
And it's definitely something people were doing, not just specifically to blackmail people. But again, it's like AI isn't the only means through which people do that, but it shouldn't be that easy for people to do that. Because that's where I'm like, it definitely isn't. If somebody is going to do that, they should have the most difficult time possible. And if they're going to spend like years of their life dedicated to figuring out ways to do that, they're going to figure out how to do that shit regardless. And that's where I'm like, you can't really stop that person because they'll dedicate years of their life. So again, it just shouldn't be a couple of clicks for them to be able to do it.
I mean, well, there used to be a industrially enforced mechanism that prevented a lot of people from just gaining access to the means of production and distribution of films. And the democratization of technology has lowered the threshold or removed any barriers to entry, it seems, into creating things of any kind. It's funny, like, I think at one point in time, there were pornographers out there who genuinely believed that they were creating art. But now I'm convinced that that's like a fantasy in itself, that person, that filmmaker even pretends that anymore, because it's very clearly a money-making endeavor.
No, Axel Braun is an artist. He's an artiste.
Well, that's okay. So that's like.
Have you seen?
That's like one in how many?
No. He's the only one I know.
That's what I mean.
As a pornographer who puts time into like the costumes so much that the costumes on the superhero porns that he produces are better than a lot of like non-pornographic superhero costumes. That's where I'm like, he's the only one where I'll be like, nah, that dude is better than a lot of, he's more of an artist than Uwe Boll. Uwe Boll is a joke compared to Axel Braun, and I will die on this hill in that. Like, I don't really care about pornography, but I do care about art. And like, it would be like Jesus denying Peter if I didn't acknowledge Axel Braun as an artist, because that's where I'm like, not all pornography is trying to do what he's doing, in that 99.99% of them who say that they're doing art are just doing it as an excuse to fuck, or an excuse to like get a specific person to fuck, and they're lying about it. But when you see somebody put the time into the art side, it's like you can't even deny it at that point.
I mean,
that's why I'm
what's
like, you can't,
what's not to
Axl
love
Braun
about
can't be denied.
Iron Man Triple X? That name says it all.
That's what I'm saying. Like you can tell he loves these properties and is using pornography as an excuse to make these films that he always wanted to make.
Like,
it just happened to be porn.
I know that Batman versus Superman with Wonder Woman is definitely like an Eiffel Tower style flick. Thor. I mean, what other title do you need? X-Men. Title, it says it all.
Oh man, that's where I'm like, it's funny to me, in that it shows what's possible, clearly with not a huge budget. So when you see like,
he just has access to like Disney's costume department. Nobody knows. He's got like a secret inside with the costume department at Disney.
But some of them are better than Disney. Like
the Captain Marvel costume is actually better.
Movie stuff, but like the
Captain Marvel, the Wicked Captain Marvel costume is better than the Disney Captain Marvel costume.
Like Axl Braun's done some stuff that's better than like the Eternals costumes.
Yeah, but those costumes sucked.
They did. That's what I'm saying.
Holy shit, Chick Deadpool, that looks awesome.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to say, man. It's like it's almost unbelievable the quality that Axl Braun has managed to actually create.
His Rogue looks more like Rogue than whatever that chick they cast as Rogue.
Exactly. So
like totally built like Rogue.
In that the way he's like, he's doing parody, but he's not mocking the property. He's like putting love into the creation of the aesthetics of the output to the point where it's like, this dude just, again, he's clearly not trying to be a joke. And I think just is like, oh, I'm going to come in and just take over this segment and effectively create this segment of pornography that actually takes itself somewhat seriously on this one level and then takes itself absolutely not seriously everywhere else. And it works in a way that I think a lot of people wish they could do, but it's only accomplishing it because he's actually trying to make art.
Awesome. Like Batwoman is coming on to fucking Wonder Woman. That's like a perfect pairing right there. That's probably the best damn scene in Justice League Triple X.
Well, and it's like the jokes that get made are like actually funny to the point where you're like, oh, they wrote this. Somebody wrote this. They didn't just come in and put on the costumes and then just like improv until the sex scene. Like, no, they wrote this out. They thought about it. They edited. They rewrote the joke and got something that's actually funny to the point where you're like, again, I think in the context of, because there's like a line between softcore pornography and then actual pornography, and the difference between the two is often like very blurry. But it's like, you know, when you're not watching softcore, and it's like only when you see it, where it's like, it's not even necessarily about a specific thing or a specific body part. It's more so like, I think
hardcore pornography is like watching athletes or gymnasts. Softcore pornography still relies on some kind of, well, they pretend to have a story, some better than others.
I feel like it's almost like wushu versus an actual fight, in that like there's choreography and there may be some contact, but it's largely under control in a way that like pornography is definitely in a ring and there's boundaries, but in that they're like letting the boundaries be tested and there's like a referee and it's not like full on street fighting. So there's like, and because it's like, especially now when you talk about they have romance coordinators on regular movie sets, and it like I don't know if they have these things on porn sets, but from what it seems like, it even if it's pornographic, it doesn't seem like these people are necessarily enjoying themselves when there's like 40 people fucking recording. It's like a job. It's like an actual, and I think in lay people's minds, there's like this fantasy of pornography as being like this, like, oh, I get to go have sex for work, like, and have sex and get paid for it in ways like, especially dudes romanticize that thought of like someone valuing their junk so much that like they're willing to pay to watch them give their junk to somebody else. Like, I think American dudes are really into that concept, even though like if it really came down to it, most of them wouldn't be able to do it, even if they were like actually in a situation where they agreed to do it and were like into doing it. Like, they wouldn't actually be able to do it because there's a performance element to it that once you realize, oh, these people are fucking professional, like it happens to be that they're professional fuckers, but they're still professionals. Like it, and in the same way that it's like, it probably kind of ruins it to a degree for them where they like go home and some of them may still enjoy it, but because it's now a job, they probably can't enjoy sex in the same way that somebody who hasn't made it into their career can potentially. I don't know. But these are the, like, those dudes are the same ones that thought the like casting couch videos were real. You know what I mean? It's like, or like any of the fucking all those situational porn where they were doing that for like, I guess probably a decade, where people, those American guys didn't realize it was like, it would have been illegal for that shit to be real without like a consent form. And they didn't think that far to think that like, oh no, you can't build an industry around people videotaping themselves doing actually illegal crimes and then like selling those videos publicly.
Yeah.
So I think maybe.
Well, I think now they have to include things like in a lot of these things, they have to include a banner that says, hey, these are professional actors and this is fiction.
It's been there for decades. Been there for decades. And if you go back and watch like old porn videos, that shit's been there because they don't want people to think that the shit is real when it's not. And I think they've, especially if it was filmed in California, they've had those laws there for a while. So it's like, if it wasn't filmed in California, it may not have that warning. But if it was like 85 or I want to say 85 or later, that shit's gonna have that warning.
All those dudes who think that if they go hang out at their buddy's house, their friend's mom's gonna seduce them. They're for a rude awakening.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that pizza guy trope, it was like
the pool boy.
For the pool boy. I want to say that shit was like being lampooned by the time we were teenagers because everybody realized those guys were either lying about it or were like recounting a porn and it never actually happened. And they were like, oh, it happened in a porn, so it happened to somebody, but it didn't happen to them. And it wasn't real.
Yeah, so it happened at a house in the hills in California, in front of cameras and lights, and there were actors, and everyone got paid.
Well, because that's just like, I don't know if you remember, like, they would have the write-in to like Playboy and Penthouse and shit. And in retrospect, it's so obvious that the shit that was being written in was just completely made up. Almost 100% of the time, it was probably just some kid writing in. But then some of them would be like, "Oh, this is probably an adult making this up," because the details are like, you can tell they're an older person the way that they're talking, but this still sounds made up. And a lot of the stories that you would read in these books, if you didn't know any better, then you come away thinking that this was like some real scenario that was like, you just, it's only a matter of time before you encounter this woman that's gonna like
Oh man.
attack you basically.
No, no.
And then
I legit remember the last one of those that I read in a Playboy. It was supposed to be a write-in from some woman who was talking about when she was young, she met some guy down at the beach who, I guess, put it in her butt. But I remember the moment that I stopped reading it is when I realized that the voice that was telling the story wasn't this woman's voice, but it was some old dude.
yeah, a lot of them would pretend to be women when they were writing in. So
And
that's
I like I could just hear like this voice. It's like this isn't the right voice telling this story.
nah, and that was like, 9, if not 10 out of 10 of those where in transitioning to the internet, I think increasingly it became apparent that those people were like full of shit. But if you couldn't really like, if somebody was like, "Oh, I went to Los Angeles and this happened," you couldn't really confirm it with somebody from Los Angeles. And then once you started to be able to like talk to people from Los Angeles, if you're from Indiana, then people would be like, "Oh, that's not how people are out here." There's some of that is it's not accurate. It's kind of like that, but that's not how it is at all. So being able to then check people and be like, I used to hear a lot of shit about New York and LA. And as time goes on, it seems like a lot of these things are actually compartmentalized to a few people, and then the legend gets exaggerated and just stretched and stretched. Like, yeah, Puff Daddy is a fucking crazy person who's been partying like a criminal, but not a ton. There's not like a secret underground of people who are like him. It's like, it's him. It's him. We know who it is now. So any of that like underground stuff of that, I don't want to say what people would call Illuminati, but the sort of it's like the secret society. I don't even want to say, it's just the stuff, the class separation where people can't see behind the first class veil or the first class curtain. Now we're starting to see behind it, and the things that people use that power for or that money for aren't really making them look good. It's like, obviously the criminal stuff is bad. It's just more so.
What was that place? It's Bohemian Grove.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that was like the beginning when Alex Jones, that's when he really sort of popped, and him like identifying that as like the Bilderberg group is when the conspiracy theorist shit started really getting it started getting traction. But I read a book about a journalist who was like embedded with him at the time, and it seems like Alex Jones was like a patsy. And if you sort of go back and look at him now compared to his rise, it seems like he knows, or he may have known at some point that he was being manipulated, but he stopped caring and just kept going with it as if the Bohemian Grove shit wasn't meant for him to come in and see it. Because if the book that is like, I think it was called They, uh, it's like about the what people call the shadow government when they refer to they. And it's really interesting.
Them.
Yeah, it's like got some subtitle, but I think they was like, it's either they or them. It's something along those lines. But the story was like, it was really eye opening in that seeing Alex Jones's rise, seeing David Icke's rise, but also seeing the Bohemian Grove video, how it was received in mainstream culture compared to what this reporter is then saying as, or journalist is saying, is the embedded version of how that went down. That makes it made me wonder, not just with Alex Jones, but with a lot of these people, do they know if their strings are being pulled? How many of them know? And then how many of them are just going along with it for the sake of their ego being fulfilled? And it's like really difficult to know, because then you find out with like Ann Coulter, it's like, yeah, she don't believe in half the shit, if not more than half the shit that she says, but she says it just to keep making money. And then Rush Limbaugh, it's like he seemed to believe in the shit, but he would say more extreme shit just to keep making money. So I don't know, when we're dealing with these conspiracists and the theories by proxy, it's like, it's always difficult to know where the manipulation starts and ends and where the back room begins. But that's again where in a lot of cases we're starting to get to the back rooms, and then
how much of Rush Limbaugh is not an echo chamber, but like a feedback loop? Like how much of it is like that kind of how much of those ideas are just feeding on themselves once they're out in the wild? Like obviously there's an origin someplace, but how much of it is like just a snowball effect? I've always been curious about that. Like, how did Flat Earth get so crazy big? And then of course, like the one that really gets me is, everything. A lot of things were about being woke for a while, but I think that's kind of subsided. But now there's this other thing that I keep reading still, which is the assertion that someone needs to wake up, and if they could just open their eyes, they would see the truth. Kind of assertion that some people now have some kind of enlightenment that others lack. I think what it really means is that I just can't go on the internet and look at the comments. Or I just have to avoid like any kind of commentary on like anything that's remotely politicized.
Well, and then, being politicized is weird in that you don't have to be a specialist to get into the political arena, but then they want to draw subjects that demand specialization into the political arena for discussion. And I feel like Joe Rogan is the precursor to that.
Yeah.
I'm just asking questions, I'm just asking questions. And at the same time, it's like a person who asks a question of someone who can answer it doesn't necessarily have the capacity to understand the answer, even if they get the answer.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. It's like, so I can ask all sorts of questions about like particle physics. It doesn't mean that I'm going to understand the answer.
Right.
Am I even qualified to receive the answer to such questions? Probably not.
Yeah.
I'm just being realistic. Like my understanding of particle physics is limited, like dramatically limited, and that probably means I know more about it than most people. That I can even say that it's limited.
But that's, again, knowing the limits of your own intelligence or your own knowledge is part of self-awareness that I don't think all of Americans are made to have. And I think that's where a lot of emotionally intelligent people who are more self-aware appear more it's like they seem smarter, but they just have the wherewithal to know the limits of their intelligence, not to talk past it. Like, which I guess that technically does make them outwardly smarter, but that doesn't necessarily inherently make them have more intelligence. I think that's like, it's weird how exposure bias will make someone come to a certain conclusion, because it's like, if a right winger spends their time saying a bunch of dumb shit about minorities, you're going to assume they're like not much smarter than like a cave person. But in reality, they're not stupid per se. It's just the things that they are most frequently represented by make them exaggerate the way they are perceived in a way that makes them look dumber than they potentially are. And that's
still a vocal minority within a group of people that are not a not homogenous entity. And so it's compounded by that.
But it's like one of those things where it don't sound correct, but actually the correct thing is a person's intelligence is not really representative or represented by what that person says, even when that person is trying to represent themselves accurately. The capacity to speak doesn't necessarily accurately represent that person's capacity to think. And I think that's where, or to write for that matter, the capacity to get other people to understand one's line of thought or understanding is like equated with that person's understanding in many cases. Like even in the physical context, where if somebody is like a prolific fighter or combat artist, it's expected that they'll make a good teacher, or vice versa. And it's not necessarily true, but that's a hard thing to come to terms with. For whatever reason, I think it's just culturally, it's just ingrained in Americans. I don't know about I only say Americans because I don't know about anywhere else enough to make a statement about it, where I know it's ingrained in us here, where it's like they'll say those who don't do teach, or who can't do teach, where it's like,
wait, those who can do and those who can't teach gym. I think that's the way it goes.
I don't.
No, those who can teach and those who can't teach gym.
because it's like you still have to be able, like, I've never heard anybody assume that the person who can't do can then teach gym, because they're trying to make it as if like this person has no physical capacity to do anything, which is where I'm like,
No, it's those who can do, those who can't teach, and those who can't teach gym. That's right. I was missing that intermediate phrase.
because that's where I'm like,
No, I knew I was missing something.
Physical education from community.
Yeah. What a horrible class.
Yeah, that I thought they did a good job lampooning that whole framework. But even then, it's hard to know what their end statement was, if they were trying to make a statement at all. Because that's what I'm like, I don't know. They'll skirt around things and not necessarily make a political statement, but then other things, it's like that feels like you're making a definitive one, but I don't know, because Dan Harmon is too inconsistent of a person because of his drinking. So I don't know with things like that if it's like me reading too much into it and trying to like impose a level of art that isn't actually there. Because you never want to be that person either. It's like sometimes the art is just there and the deeper meaning is just to enjoy it, and like you're not supposed to be finding something that's like a hidden layer. And the people that end up doing that end up being way more pretentious than they need to be. And it's like it's hard to know without confirmation if a piece of art is one or the other. So I feel like it's better not to like go too far in an interpretation. Because it's not even about being hollow so much as art that encourages enjoyment of the now has a specific purpose, and over analysis can ruin that, where there's like a I don't know where it may be, a genetic thing, but the propensity to want to like overanalyze something, whether it's like because it's good or bad, can override the sense of enjoyment that was experienced like during that actual thing. Because there's been times where I've like enjoyed something and then I thought about it too hard and I'm like, oh, that wasn't as good as I thought it was. It's like if I just didn't
I usually have
overanalyze it, I wouldn't have ruined my experience.
I find myself analyzing or overanalyzing things when I don't enjoy them, because I'm trying to find something about it that it's like, well, at least I can enjoy it for these qualities.
Well, and again, I mean, I don't know if overanalysis is something that, like, when it's done unconsciously, it's like it's out of your control, because it's like you can overanalyze something on purpose, but when something's being like overanalyzed unconsciously, that's where I'm like, I don't. That's just like literally out of one's control. Which that's where I mean, I don't know if that's coming from like a genetic thing or if it's like a cultural thing. But it in many ways to me, it feels cultural. But I'm not, I'm not unaware that somebody can do it on purpose. But that's where I was like kind of talking about the involuntary that ends up, again, it's like it can ruin something that if you just didn't overanalyze it, it would have been a good experience.
think that's like my experience of going to museums with guided tours.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's like I just really have to shut off my analysis if a tour is guided because it's like you just want to find something wrong with how they're presenting it. It's like, oh no, you should have said this first. You should have started here. No, we should have gone in this order. And it's like it's so hard not to do that when it's like if I go to a museum to a certain degree, I want to experience things on my own. But if that option is taken away, I also then have to like actively pull back my desire to analyze and just let it like it has to go to the end before I like even let that start to come out because it's like it's unfair to the person who's doing the tour. But it's also just this weird impulse where it's like it's just really hard. I think the more life experience you have, it's like harder to like let somebody guide you through things because like no, I can read the fucking signs. I can go through I can figure out what this painting is, but it's like that's their job to take you through these things and explain what has been determined to be the most important things to get the best and most effective experience. And it's like somebody can think that they can come in and do that, but that's just a delusion that is really hard to get over. And I think it's like
So like 15 something years ago, I went on a tour of Frank Lloyd Wright's house in Chicago, and got to walk through like the whole thing. Got to see his workshop. Got to see his design room. It's a really cool house. Really cool house. And I couldn't wait for the person to stop talking in every room because I just wanted to look at the place. I didn't need them to. I didn't need somebody to tell me that I was standing in a kitchen. It was really obvious that like the library was a library. Like it was everything was so like everything about the space was obvious. Like this is what this room was for. And it wasn't until they stopped talking, until the whole tour was over, that I was able to actually ask them questions about rooms, about things that I had noticed. And that's when it became really interesting, because I was able to actually talk to them about things that I saw that weren't part of the tour. Like, hey, what was this weird, section of this bookcase thing? And they're like, oh, well, that's actually leads to a second room behind that's not part of the tour. Like, oh, well, I'm glad that I know that now. That's kind of cool. That's the kind of stuff that there has to be an element of discovery with any kind of with art, I think. And too much guidance is, I think, that denies the viewer the right of participation.
I mean, I don't think everything has a right of participation.
I mean, by participation, I mean just like being able to see it and to be in the presence of a work of art and to experience it for themselves. That's the participation.
Okay. So
I don't mean like I don't mean that like somebody gets to walk up and get up on the podium and say what they think about something.
Right. Well, I think that's the issue. Is like there is this understood right of interpretation if something is labeled as art, which doesn't necessarily exist depending on the intention of the artist, which is also why it's like not necessarily wise to speak on something without knowing the intention of the artist. Because that's where, again, it's like, let's say somebody does something that's abstract, then it's easier, I think, to have that conversation about the right to interpretation. But if it's meant to invoke a specific image or a specific context or a specific construct, then I don't think that right necessarily exists. But that's also why it's important to get the artist's perspective if that thing has a right to interpret taken away, because that's where I'm like,
I think if somebody writes a love song for somebody, then that song is for that person. And it doesn't matter what anyone else interprets, and everyone else's interpretation doesn't matter at that point because it was for one person.
Right.
It's really only about the intent of the composer and the person they wrote it for. And so any kind of analysis after the fact is self-indulgence.
And then on the other end of the scale, you have like shit by like David Lynch, where he refuses to give a post-work explanation, and that then creates only the right of interpretation, where that's the only thing that exists because the artist will not actively confirm their intention after the art has been created, and it's on the art audience to carry that weight of that right to interpret because he has passed it off to the audience.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm like, there's a scale, and the audience does not always have that right in a way that I think Americans mistakenly believe they always have that right. And that's when that's just your opinion. Well, you don't always, just because you are given a constitutional right does not mean you are actually given an artistic license or an artistic right. Those two things are not the same. But Americans actively, learning less and less about art, so it gets more and more conflated with commerce. And that's where I think
well, I think that's where
9 times out of 10.
That's where the real confusion comes from, is the misidentification of art and what is art and very and design that adheres to artistic principles.
Because I think 9 times out of 10 Americans are talking about commerce when they say art.
Yeah, they're talking about design language. They're talking about things that have been commodified or used to commodify other things, but they're using the language to describe art, and so it gets confusing. One of them is definitely exists solely to sell something else. That's not art. That's a advertisement. But they look amazing. They look spectacular. They've got incredibly skilled illustrators and designers working behind the scenes, and they all have advanced educations in the arts, and they are all very creative people, but they're just making products. So and I think that's a really tough hurdle for a lot of people to get over. I don't care how nice that glass pipe is, it's a pipe. It might be beautiful. It might be really, highly crafted. It may have taken, 100 hours to render. But it's an implement. It's a tool.
Well, that doesn't mean, okay, so this is where, again, it's like the idea that the highest art has to be purely for the sake of art and can't be a tool, I think is an elitist, like, vestigial view that is meant to make it so that functional art gets valued less, and by proxy, it's easier to acquire. So I don't think that inherently it has, if anything, it has more value because it's functional, but that doesn't mean the conservatory is going to...
I mean, a hammer with a really nice handle is still just a hammer. If it's not being used as a hammer, it's not a hammer anymore.
Not if it's made out of the highest valued materials and then also engraved with an engraving that is of a highly in-demand artist. So it's like... I
mean, if that hammer is being used, then it's still a hammer.
The issue becomes if something has too much value, then people don't use it as a hammer.
Yeah.
So if like Duchamp made a hammer and then people are like, oh, this is $1 million hammer, nobody's going to use that for fucking nails, which becomes the inherent paradox.
And then Duchamp just looks at them like
art.
Assholes and proceeds to drive nails with his $1 million hammer.
Of course he would. But that's where, again, the people who try to then separate Like, I'll give an example. These are the people who.
Those are the same people that duct taped a banana to a wall.
No, I don't think those are the same. I think those people make a mockery. I think the people that would buy $1 million hammer and put it on a shelf are the same people that think Action Comics number 29 should be preserved in a case and never read. It's like it's that Venn diagram is a circle. Like, the most valuable comic book in people's minds should be preserved, not used the way it was intended to be used. So right there,
that's the worst comic, though.
Exactly.
The comic that's never been read.
Because it's exactly my point. That's where the paradox of the most valuable thing starts to undermine the ability for a thing to be used, but also be valuable for being art. Because right there, if it's valuable, then it's no longer people want to preserve that value, and that means preserving it by not using it in the way it was intended to be used.
See, I've seen so many people spend thousands of dollars on guitars that end up becoming wallflowers, and they would bring them in once a year to get them, set up, and they would always need like the most dramatic changes to the truss rods or to the bridge because they sat in a box unplayed, like at the wrong tension on the neck for an entire year, like, and not just one, but like entire collections of guitars. And I've got a small collection of guitars. I go through them regularly to make sure that everything's working right, but that's like almost a full-time job in terms of like, oh yeah, I got to make sure that everything's working. I got to actually play this thing. But I know that there are people who out there who have like, a $5,000 to $10,000 Les Paul that doesn't get any playtime. And when I picked those things up to set them up, they played like absolute shit, like dogs. Like, I could go find a $300 starter guitar off the rack that I'd set up that played better than a $5,000 Gibson. And that's wrong. Those are terrible instruments now. They just look pretty. I'm not going to call that a work of art. I'm going to call that a bunch of lipstick on a pig. A guitar only exists when it's being played. A hammer is only useful when it's being used. They look pretty, then that just seems like a waste of effort. I get it. There's some things that absolutely look amazing, like enchanted weapons. Hell yeah, those things look cool. They're also like, imbued with the power of some kind of mystic charm or magic or spectacular technology. But I also don't think that enchanted weapons are works of art either. They're just enchanted weapons. I do want to see Thor build a house with Mjolnir, though.
Well, that's a perfect example. Thor used his hammer, but it was like made of a dwarf star. So there's this element of it's probably one of the most valuable metals in the entire universe, but he's out here fucking bashing people's heads with it.
Exceptional Radio. Exceptional Randos shows produced live in Sunroom Studios' Bass Capsule. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random.
Exceptional Radio.